The rocky dirt road crunched beneath the truck's tires as I drove through the dense forest, wary of overhanging branches that scraped the windows. My eyes were constantly darting around, looking for wildlife and fallen trees. There weren't many people this far into Yosemite, but it's my job as a park ranger to patrol these woods and protect visitors from nature as much as possible. Not to mention defending nature against them. Especially at this time of year, when unlicensed hunters and inexperienced campers and hikers are out in force. It's frequently a lethal combination. I was thinking about amateur hikers when I noticed a woman standing off the road. She was standing in a rocky field on a slope leading up a hill to my left. Despite the fact that we were in the middle of nowhere, she had no hiking gear, backpack, or anything else. As I approached, she noticed me but began to walk away, marching up the rocky slope. This far out in the middle of nowhere, I expected at the very least a wave or a hello. Most of the time, if you're out on foot, you won't see anyone for days. "Hello, miss. Are you all right?" I yelled, concerned that she was suffering from exposure. Sometimes people get lost in these woods and are nearly catatonic by the time you find them. I'd seen men and women with 1,000-yard stare before. She didn't say anything, instead climbing the slope until she reached the top. She then vanished into the trees. I noticed the woman's face looked familiar and opened a file on my laptop. It displayed people who had gone missing in the area. It took a few moments, but I eventually found the woman's file. There were photos that exactly matched the person I had just seen. Except her outfit was different. And the woman had gone missing 8 months before. I reasoned that she should look much worse, especially given her lack of supplies. This was harsh, brutal wilderness. Even experienced hikers and hunters had become disoriented in the area and died as a result of the elements. I quickly called the station and reported what I'd seen, then grabbed my backpack and ran up the rocky slope towards the trees. I had a good chance of catching up to her if she kept moving at her current pace. I found her tracks at the top of the hill. I followed them into the woods, weaving my way through the trees. I followed her path through the forest for nearly an hour, growing increasingly convinced that I should have caught up with her. Something was wrong, and I had gone off the trail. It was almost as if the woman had vanished. I kept moving forward, hoping to come across her tracks again. As a novice hunter, I witnessed this on occasion. The quarry's path would occasionally vanish, only to reappear a short distance away. So I kept going, pushing branches and shrubbery aside and moving deeper into the overgrown wilderness. That's when I noticed it. "What in the world is that?" I muttered to myself, unable to believe my own eyes as the object ahead of me came into focus. A staircase appeared out of the overgrowth, looking otherworldly in this setting. What exactly is this doing out here? I was aware that I was talking to myself, but I couldn't stop myself. I couldn't stop myself from moving towards the staircase in the forest, despite a growing feeling that told me I should avoid it. I had the impression that someone was watching me as I approached the stairs. As I approached, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up and goosebumps appeared on my arms. I moved closer and closer until I was standing directly in front of it. Surprisingly, the stairs appeared to be relatively new. Except for their unusual location, they appeared unassuming and normal in every way. The wood had not become weathered or moss-coated. It was clean, and I'd say it was built within the last 10 or 20 years. However, the staircase came to an end after exactly 13 steps. It was a staircase that led nowhere. It was a strange sight out here, given how difficult it would be to build them in the middle of nowhere. What was the point of them? Who would construct them, and why? I found myself walking up the stairs even as I was asking myself these questions. My feet seemed to move involuntarily upwards, as if I were in a dream. But the sensation of eyes on the back of my neck grew worse with each step. And I was certain that I could feel the weight of someone else's movements on the stairs with me. The paranoia eventually became so strong that I had to turn around, convinced that someone or something was following me up the stairs. But when I turned around, no one was there. Suddenly, I was terrified as hell, and I wondered what I'd been thinking climbing those erroneous stairs in the woods. I began to descend, still feeling eyes on me from all sides. The nearby trees rustled, and I noticed a hazy shape moving behind them. As I hurried down the stairs, I called out to the figure, thinking it was the woman I had seen earlier. "If that's you, miss? I've been looking everywhere for you. Are you okay?" I asked the shadowy figure, but it didn't move or respond. Instead, it just stood there staring at me. "All right, lady, I can't help you if you don't." The figure in the shadows was too tall to be the woman I'd seen earlier, I realized. It appeared to be a person at least 6.5 feet tall, if not taller. And they were ducking behind a tree to avoid being seen. The thing rose even higher, and I realized it had been crouched. It was enormous, and its shape was impossible to examine in the dim light. But it was definitely keeping an eye on me. And there were more of them, I realized, my heart pounding faster and harder until it felt like it was about to beat itself out of my chest. I spun around, looking around at the forest, seeing shadow shapes everywhere. I was frozen for a few long moments, unable to move, breathe, or think. Then I noticed a long-fingered hand pushing back the foliage, ready to emerge. That jolted me out of my trance. Whatever these things were, I could tell they were not good or benevolent. They were dark creatures that drew people to them so they could feast on their minds. I averted my gaze from it and began to run. I could feel them following me as I raced through the trees. A platoon of long-fingered lanky creatures. Were they the ones who built the stairwell out here? Were they from another planet? Sasquatches? I had no idea, but every time I looked back over my shoulder, I saw them closing in on me, vague shapes moving so fast that they blurred and were difficult to distinguish. That's when I realized it was starting to get dark outside. But that didn't make sense because I'd left in the early morning hours, around 8 a.m. When I checked my watch, I noticed it was no longer working, as were my cell phone and GPS device. I had no choice but to keep running because I had no other option. I dashed through the woods until I came to the rocky ledge beside the dirt road where I'd left my truck. I ran right over the cliff, terrified and frantic, and didn't see it coming. By that point, the things were just behind me, and I was almost ready to give up fighting them. Instead, I tumbled down the rock-strewn hillside, somersaulting and hitting my elbows, knees, shoulders, and skull against the boulders and stones. A mini avalanche ensued, and I crashed hard, face-planting as my feet couldn't keep up with my momentum. As my vision dimmed, I felt a sharp pain in my forehead and tasted blood in my mouth. I fell asleep on top of a pile of rubble. When I awoke, a park ranger was standing over me, asking if I was okay. The strange thing was that I didn't recognize him. "You look familiar," he said, his brow furrowed. "How do I address you?" When I told him, his jaw dropped and his face became paler. "It cannot be. Everyone assumed you were dead." Looking around, I noticed that my truck was nowhere to be found. It was also a different season. When I went into the forest, the trees were turning slightly yellow, an early sign of autumn. They were bright green now, as they would be at the start of summer. "What is today's date?" I inquired of him. He told me, but at first I didn't believe him. "You're making that up," I shook my head. "I just went for a couple hours into the woods to find the woman." That's when I thought of her again. Is she still alive? Or has she gone missing? Nobody has seen a woman. It's as if no one has seen you in 8 months. His gaze was suspicious, and I realized he thought I was insane. Or had lost it in the woods. I shook my head and returned my gaze to the woods. "We need to send out a search party." "Did you not hear me? If you saw a woman when you went out there, she's probably long gone." My gaze was fixed on the trees in the distance. "It's not for her. Something else is out there." I couldn't resist the pull and began to make my way back up the rocky slope. It was as if I were an iron filing, and that staircase was a strong magnet, attracting me to it. "We should all go." The other ranger grabbed my arm and yelled at me to calm down. It took 5 more men to stop me and get me to the hospital. They keep telling me that what I saw was a dream. That I was afflicted by exposure. I got lost in the woods and hit my head, resulting in a concussion. The doctors claim I hallucinated everything. But I remember what I saw. And as soon as I leave this hospital, I'm returning,